I'll be calling this meeting to order at 6:08. Thank you for your patience this evening. We were getting some technical difficulties taken care of. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome those of you that are participating in the Board of Education meeting tonight, those that are watching the meeting via live streaming on YouTube. And we ask that anyone that will be addressing the board tonight to please use the microphone at the podium to identify yourselves for the record. As a reminder, the link to the meeting is on the district webpage and under the Board of Education. The streaming will run through the end of the meeting. In the event that there's a disruption in the audio portion, I will pause the meeting until it is reestablished. There is a board member, Mr. Eloy Hidon, who is participating via teleconference this afternoon. Mr. Hidon, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, sir. And this is allowed by OMI and the district's open meeting resolution to allow that this board member appear telephonically. Dr. Elder, could you please please announce the meeting for me?
Madam President, this meeting has been announced in accordance with the open meetings resolution and is a legally constituted meeting of the Los Lunas Schools Board of Education.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's see. Since she's not looking at me, I'm going to ask Ms. McDowell to do the Pledge of Allegiance for me. Will you? Thank you. All right, for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I
pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States and that the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Elder, are there any changes or deletions to the agenda?
Madam President, there are not.
Gentlemen, I'll stand for a motion to approve the agenda.
Ms. Garcia, I move that we approve the agenda as submitted by Dr. Elder and her staff.
So I got a motion by Mr. Smith and a second by Mr. Bennett. Is that correct, Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Thank you. Any discussion on the agenda? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote. Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
And I vote yes, the agenda is approved. Dr. Elder, has there been any requests for public comment?
No, Madam President, there has not.
Thank you. Dr. Elder, at this time, I'm going to turn over item number 6, which is presentation of the budget overview 2023-24 fiscal year. I'll turn it over to you to introduce the Chief Finance Officer.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I'd like to introduce Sandy Tracek. She is our Chief Financial Officer. She will be giving us an overview of the budget process this evening and a timeline for preparing the 23-24 school year budget.
Thank you.
Madam President, members of the board, interim superintendent, Dr. Elder. I'd like to start the first board presentation for the 2023-24 fiscal year. The first slide we have is on our budget requirement. And so our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. Every year, it's the same time. And another requirement is that prior to June 20th each year, the school board needs to have the budget approved. The budget must demonstrate that we have opened it up to public and parental input. The budget must be balanced and it must be approved by the PED prior to July 1st. The next slide is just kind of like the purpose of our budget. It talks about how the budget's just a way of providing a statement on financial terms and lists some of the objectives of the budget. So I'm not going to go into detail on it. It's pretty much just about the budget. The next slide is actually supplement 1 and 3 are some kind of instructions and rules we have to follow for the budget, and that's on the PED website. So actually, if you ever need any good sleeping material, this would be a report you'd want to read. Otherwise, not too many people would. The next is the budget timeline. So for the first part, March 7th, 8th, and the 24th, we met with the principals for their input session and went over a lot of things about their student numbers, the teachers that they have, and some of the things that they believe that would be useful for their schools. So we met with all the schools. We had one school that had to attend to emergencies, so there's only one more to go. And then the next one is March, I'm sorry, not the next date is today's. This is the first overview of the budget. Next thing scheduled is April 11th through 13th will be the spring budget workshop. And that is where the PED gives a lot of information that they want pushed down to the districts. So we'll find out more about the budget when we have that training. The next date we have is March 29th, which tomorrow we'll be presenting to the NEA. It will probably pretty much be about the same unless the governor signs something. Might be the only thing we might know differently from tonight. April 7th is the parent and public budget presentation. April 18th is the final board budget workshop. May 9th will be the board meeting for budget approval. And June 7th, the budget is due to the PED. Okay, the next slide is a 10-year historical trend of student enrollment. And you can see from starting from 2013-14 school year, it looks kind of steady. It goes up and down a little bit. It doesn't take a bad turn until 2019-20. And then which COVID time. And then at 20 to 21, it starts to keep going, takes a little upturn and keeps going. And what you can see mostly from this one is you look from the school year that we're in now, you can see that there's been a slight increase. So I would, the budget is actually prepared off of the average of the 80th and 120th day. So we should see a little bit of an increase in student numbers to help the budget. The next slide is the teacher cost index. And this is when we do actually go over the SCG calculation, this is a multiplier in there. And you can see from this year, our multiplier was actually the same calculation as we had been in the prior year. So that won't change at all. But you can kind of see how it was going down and now it's been kind of more steady. The next slide is the history of the unit value. And you can see it has the years and then it has the initial unit value and the final unit value. Typically the unit value, they have it a little bit lower. There's only, I think, only twice in here that you'll see where the final unit value was actually less than what they initially estimated. If you get down to the next school year that we're going over, the budget year for 23-24, you can see I don't have those numbers yet. And typically, I'm hoping it usually comes about a week after the spring budget workshop. Hopefully it has sometimes come at the spring budget workshop. So cross your fingers, that's when it comes. The next slide. It just shows you the approved budget from fiscal year to fiscal year. So last year at the end of the budget, when we came to you, the budget was for the 22-23 year was 194,000,000. 15,363. So you can kind of see each year it has grown and grown. Okay, the next slide is our legislation and mandates. I wanted, if you can see the three on there with in red. Those are the only ones that have been signed. These are possible changes that will happen. Could happen, but until the governor signs them, it's just a possibility. So the first one, the first grouping I have are changes that would possibly affect the budget's expenses. So HB2, the public school employees will receive an average of a 5% salary increase. And so that hasn't been signed, but that is what we have at this point as a possibility. Then if you look at the next one, the SB 52 or 521 is a supplemental salary increase, which is 1% to offset inflation and insurance premium increases. So if you're looking, if they both pass, then it would actually be a 6% increase. HB 127, the minimum salary for educational assistants will now be $25,000 is the minimum. And that's been signed, so that will happen. And one thing I wanted to note on this is due to compaction and when educational assistants increase, then the next level is going to increase, and it just kind of keeps some domino effect. So it's more than just affecting the educational assistants. HB 134, menstrual products provided in bathrooms. Products will be provided to all students at no cost to the student. HB 533 is school group insurance contribution increases. The minimum share of employer group insurance contributions for the NMSIA based on salary levels. And so it's probably hard for everyone to read, but at the 80%, and this would be for the district, 80% would be up to 50,000. So right now, the way our insurance goes is anything over 25,000, then there's a 60-40 split. So the district would pay 60, the employees paying 40%. Now, the 40% that the employee pays is only if you make over 60,000. So where someone, let's say, makes $30,000, they were at 40%. On this new schedule, they would only be paying 20%. And then the salary range from 50 to 60,000, the employee would pay 30%. And the district would pay 70. So that has not been signed yet, but that's a possibility, and that would change the budget quite a bit. SB 4, healthy universal school meals ensures free and healthy school meals to all students, and that's been signed. And that really, in some ways, I put that on there because it's big. However, the student nutrition does normally support their own budget. So, it may not affect operational at all, but I thought it was worth noting, just because if student nutrition doesn't have enough to make their budget, then operational picks up any slack. Okay, the next one are revenue changes. HB 130 is a K+ program, which provides additional program units for public schools, defines instructional hours and professional hours, and repeals the extended learning time units, and that's been signed. So we won't, on the budget, we'll have it's going to be totally different when it comes to all the ELT that we had in the last budget. HB 199 increase school at-risk index, increases fine arts factor, and increases the responsibility factors for principals and assistant principals. So those are all the possible legislation that I think would affect the budget the most. And the next page on other continuation of like legislation and mandates. The insurance rates, we can expect to see the insurance rates go up for medical insurance. Dental insurance, we've been told will not have an increase. And we anticipate increase in the liability and risk insurances that we pay as a district. Next, the educational retirement employer contribution will be increasing 1%. That's from last year, so that's that will happen for sure. And the new rate will now be 18.15%. So. And just as a reminder, salary reminder that when you're looking at the budget, it estimates that the typically all salaries and benefits come out to about 85% of the budget. And next is just questions, and then our list of our email addresses if anyone wants to contact us about your budget. And so I stand for some questions.
Thank you, Sandy. All right, gentlemen, any questions?
Yes, Madam President.
Go
So
ahead.
Sandy, so we don't really know what kind of raise increase they'll get yet because nothing's been signed off, right?
Correct, has not been
So-
signed yet, so, I mean, I'm guessing it's probably going to be that, but
Mhm.
I don't know for sure.
And then how many do we look like are gonna have to jump up to a $25,000 level of the teachers aid?
I looked at it we kind of looked at it more like dollar wise, so I'm not exactly sure, but there are quite a few that it should affect. I think it will affect quite a few, so it's gonna hit.
And right now, you're saying that the district's paying 60% of the insurance, it's a 60-40 thing?
The 60-40, if they're under 25,000, then we pay even more of a percentage. So it depends. It starts out kind of like if you're making 15,000, and I think that's a 80-20, so we would pay. So there's a scale
So the
that goes
district
on
will
there.
increase their amount if she signs it.
Right.
Got it.
So yes, it would be very beneficial to the employee. So it's kind of hard right now. If you're looking at an increase in medical expense, the percentage goes up for the medical cost. But then to an employee, if you're now getting a higher percent paid by the district. So some people would see an increase with the rate going up, but some people would see an increase with the rates going up, but then if the district's paying a higher portion, then it'll go down, so.
Okay, and
Depending on where you
also,
fall.
I guess the other one on the House Bill 130, we're pretty much there in numbers anyway, aren't we? Dr. Elder?
Madam President, Board Member Bennett, yes, we are very close on reaching that 1140 with no disruption to the calendar that was approved last week.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else questions? Mr. Smith?
Right there.
Yes.
So Sandy, just a couple, do we have to turn the budget in by the 20th or the 7th? Because I'm looking at two different bullets. And one says June 7th budget due to PED on June 7th, but then it says we have to approve it by the 20th.
Right, so we have you to approve by the 20th, and then I actually have some time for all the additional reports that have to follow. So the board would approve on the 20th. And then I would use that for all the reports that we create. And actually, I have to have everything in the system. So not only like when you're approving, you're going to be approving the operational budget, but all the federal funds have to be uploaded into the system for the PED, and all the salary information reports that you have to fill, and all those, and all that has to be totally completed by June 7th. So I do have actually some time in between.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense. And then as far as the April 17th meeting, when we do it for parent and public input, where and how do we announce that?
Here and then,
We
it
do
will
that
be
paper?
part of the,
Yes,
We do,
just like I do regular meetings, so. And it's already, should be up on the webpage tonight. And the news bulletin has those dates already.
and then also one more, sorry. This is just for my information. Now that we're. I guess I could ask it this way, how much dollars are we talking about when we talk about the reduced lunches and the ones that actually pay full price? How much money is that we're, I don't want to call it bringing in, but how much money are we talking?
well, I'm not exactly sure how the state's gonna do it, because right now we're running it with a federal program. And the state's going to be paying to make sure that everyone can receive a free and reduced. So I'm not exactly sure how they're gonna do that yet. I would think once this is signed, or now that it's been signed as of today, I found out. I believe, I'm hoping that it would be, will it be different than the way the federal calculation is done, or?
So there will be more funds for us. Because if it gets signed that we're providing free lunches for everyone.
Yes.
So it shouldn't
So
impact.
we- And we are already doing free lunches this year. But
Right,
in some cases, some cases it's cost, it's. When they're looking at a free and reduced student versus non, the rate is different. So in some cases, it's hurting us to provide the free meals. But it was something that we thought was important to do. So we already have chosen to do it, and we're actually very happy that we did, but we didn't know exactly the financial impact that it was going to hit. So we put some money in the operational budget to cover just in case. And the student nutrition department, right now, their fund, we have been able to help them with some of the, like right now, the ELT, they're working more days, so they're getting that 3% little stipend type of thing, and our ESSER funds are paying for that stipend to kind of help the student nutrition fund, because prior to COVID, they had a nice, comfortable cash balance to kind of keep them going, that just kind of was there, keeping them in case of any emergency meeting. And once COVID happened, they lost all that cash. So thank goodness we had that. They were desperately hurt during COVID. So we are now really trying to hope that we can gain their cash back again. So we're helping them in some ways we're using help with the ESSER funds.
If I can just follow up real quick, Mr. Smith, so then we don't get to tell them how much, since we've been doing it, how much we need to do it for next year. They're gonna tell us what they're gonna give us, and then we have to make that work and then put in our end if it doesn't cover it. Is that?
I'm not sure how they're going to do it
Okay.
yet. I don't think that it's been followed through exactly how they're going to distribute that money yet. So I know what we do now for the federal,
Covers
off the
it.
top of my head, but.
Right.
I know what we do for the federal. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no,
Follow up.
that was my point, how what we plug into the formula, if we didn't have anybody paying for it in the first place, so.
Right now, like the way the federal does it is they count how many meals that they serve, and then we get so much per. So if we were to be taking in money, would matter the difference on the free and reduced or not. So we get a different rate now. We would get a better rate if we weren't giving if we weren't giving it to everyone. But we chose to do that so we could get free and reduced. So we are receiving funds from the federal to cover those meals, but not at as great of a rate if we were just getting from the students that are free and reduced.
Thank you.
Go ahead, yes.
How long does the governor have to sign these bills?
I guess it depends on when it was in, but I think the last day is April 7th.
So like the end of next week. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hidon, did you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam President.
Go right ahead.
Madam President, members of the board, I think I want to, I think I have 7 or 8 dates that I wrote down here. I think it's April 7th or April 18th, where Sandy, you said you're gonna have public input, the community be able to address you. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, according to the timeline that we have in front of us, Mr. Hidon, it's April 17th.
April 17th, okay, and where will that be?
Here.
She's stating it'll be here in the boardroom. Is the board, is the board in session? Or is that just you in a work session with parents and community members that are interested? And do we know how that
I
usually
think
goes? I
they're-
guess that's the question I think Mr. Hidon would want to know.
Madam President, members of the board, what it normally says, when we do the formal announcement for, in the paper, we just not have technically the dates, but it will say as a quorum may be in attendance.
Maybe,
But
okay.
it's just, you do not have to attend. It's just for, you may tend to observe.
Did you hear that, Mr. Hidon?
Yes, Madam
Okay.
President, my question was the public gonna be able to address our finance department on their needs?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm hearing yes.
Okay. I have about 5 or 6 questions. I think I'll hold off on them because I think I would like to get with Dr. Elder before all these meetings. Sandy, when would you want questions from us regarding numbers and line items, stuff like that? What meeting?
You can email me anytime. But the work session is April 18th, so. If you want to discuss it then, or if you want to, you can email me tomorrow.
I have probably about 5 or 6 questions. I just want to know what meeting that you wanted us to address questions regarding the budget. Travel, baseball uniforms, band travel, books, stuff like that. I just want to know what meeting you want be ready for us to address questions to you.
You can send it to me anytime, and then we can discuss it in person, I guess, on the 18th.
Okay, I'll go ahead and send you an email on my questions, but I also want to address them formally. So I'll go ahead and question that in my email.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hidon. Anybody else? I think that's good. Thank you, Sandy. Dr. Elder, anything you want to add?
Thank you. Well done.
Okay, so next item on the agenda is item number 6, which is the I'm sorry, it would be actually item number 7, discussion and possible action regarding the ad hoc policy committee. So during this last month, I put this on the agenda, gentlemen. I wanted to have a discussion of the authority of the committee. There have been some questions raised as to who's got the authority to approve committee members, not approve committee members. And I think that we need to get some guidance from our legal staff on that. So I did reach out to staff to have them be prepared to give us some guidance today so that I could know if the president is responsible for appointing or not appointing committee members, if it's the chairman of the committee that does that. I don't think our policy was very clear. So due to the questions that have come up, I think it was important that we all hear from council what she recommends we do about this. And if I can turn it over to you.
Madam President, esteemed members of the board, Interim Superintendent Dr. Elder, thank you so much for the opportunity to come in front of you today. I have spent some time doing two things over the last week or so. The first is reviewing your current policies. And the second is going back and reviewing all of the discussions that this board has had as it pertains to the policy committee. I was also present in the room last week when there was some discussion as well as public comment. So I'm aware of all of those things going on. In addition, pursuant to your policies, I've had conversations with board members regarding this very question. I would like to be able to say, Madam President, that I have a very clear and easy answer for you. Unfortunately, I do not. And the reason for that is the policies themselves are less than clear about appointments and creations of committees. I first, let me just go back and let you know what I did to review the creation of this committee as I understand the committee was created. My understanding of how this committee was created occurred, first of all, in an October 25th meeting. I went back and I read the minutes for that meeting. And then in addition to that, I went back and watched the video of that meeting. And in that meeting, there was some discussion about how the committee could be created. And it was indeed, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Vickers who asked whether or not there had to be a formal action of some sort. And the response at that time was that there did not need to be any formal action because you, Madam President, had authority to appoint. That was the end of that discussion on October 25th. There was a little bit of discussion about the superintendent would give some names over to the board. And that was it. That was the end of the discussion on October 25th. The next meeting occurred on November 29th. Again, I reviewed the minutes. Again, I watched the video. And in that meeting, there was some additional discussion. Again, no formal board action was taken. In neither the October meeting or the November meeting was it an action item before the board. It was simply a discussion. And the discussion that occurred in November was basically around the fact that anyone could add any names of any individuals who wanted to participate in this committee. So then it opened the committee up to a series of additional recommendations that were made. And that's what happened at the end of the November 29th meeting. I went back and I thought, okay, well, I'm not sure that this is formal board action. Just under the Open Meetings Act, I will say that you as a board cannot take any action without a formal vote, without it being noticed as an action item. So under the first thing that I did, of course, is look at the Open Meetings Act, and the Open Meetings Act very clearly says that in order for there to be any action of the board, as Mr. Vickers questioned in the first meeting in October 25th, there had to be an action item and there had to be a vote. And it's very clear that as it relates to this ad hoc committee, that did not occur. So when I was here on November 29th, we were talking about a resolution. And at that time, I explained the different levels of the law, the top level being the statute. So that's why I started with the review of the statute in this particular case. The next thing that I did is I reviewed your local policies to see whether or not your local policies had any additional information in terms of how this board could act in terms of the creation of this committee, in terms of the appointments that were made to this committee, and whether or not the actions of this board had already lined up with what your policies say. And the policies themselves are not very clear. What I can say is that your policy says, and I'm going to read it to you, your policy 2.9, actually, that's the board policy. Give me 1 second. Let me just pull up the right policy here. Your policy 2.4 describes board committees. And what it says in policy 2.4 says that when deemed necessary, a specific task, a special committee may be appointed by the board. And what that language says to me is that any action that is appointed by the board means that it's an action of the board as a whole that requires conformance with the Open Meetings Act. So when we were creating the agenda for today's meeting, I specifically requested that it not just be a discussion item, but that it actually also be an action item. Because in order for this board to make any decision about a committee that was probably most likely not created according to the Open Meetings Act, you would need to take a formal action today. And that's why it's noticed as both a discussion item and an action item. So that's policy 2.4. The rest of the policy 2.4 talks about a finance subcommittee and an audit committee, both of which are statutory committees. So those two are not the committee that we're talking about here. We're talking about something different. But there is also another section in your board committee, and it talks about temporary committees. In that section, similar to the beginning of section 2.4, it talks about the committee being created by an action of the board, which means, members of the board, that in order for you to create this committee, in order for it to be a valid committee that's going to be able to do the work that you're requesting, it has to be action item and you vote to create the committee. Addressing the second question about appointments to the committee, the temporary committee action, the policies that you have here under temporary committees and the general committees under the board actually don't describe how anyone can or cannot be appointed to these committees. There's some very vague term under the president's authority, under policy 2.3.2 that allows the president to appoint committees, but that is not the creation of the committee, right? So in my job, we take a look at the exact language, and appointing is not creating. And even though that's the same language that is used in the other section, if you're creating a committee, if you're going to ask a committee to do something, it would seem to me that you would want to follow a formal board action. So again, the two sections of your board that allow you to create a committee of any kind for any purpose, for any specific task, are 2.4 and 2.43. And both of those require an action of the board as a whole. I went back, as I said, and I reviewed your videos and I reviewed your minutes. And it's very clear that there was some misunderstanding about how these committees can be created. I understand that there may have been a past practice that allowed the board president to create a committee. I understand that that may have been what occurred in the past or may not have occurred in the past. I don't know. I wasn't here on October 25th. I wasn't asked to weigh in. I don't know exactly where that idea came from. I do know that John Kennedy in his presentation talked about a committee. And there are many reasons why this board would want to create a committee. And there are many different ways that that committee can be created. Despite all of that, however it is that you decide to create your committee, it would still require a board action. So the first recommendation that I have to you today is that you take formal action to create a committee so that this board is in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. The second thing that I want to address is who goes on this committee, who participates, and how is it going to be run or operated. The policies that you have speak specifically only about two committees, Finance Committee, Audit Committee, both statutory. They do not speak about a policy committee, but your policies do in fact talk about how important the policies are. And I will tell you that the statutes themselves, the primary law in the state of New Mexico, says that the primary duty of any school board is the creation of the policy. That is the number one duty for which you have been elected to serve, that it is to create policies for your district. And your own policy talks about at 2.9, it says in accordance with the public school code and the public education departments, the Board of Education exercises its leadership in operation and management of Los Lunas schools through the formulation and adoption of policy. So not only is it the state law, but it is also your duty under your local policies that it be the board that creates these policies. Now, I realize what Mr. Kennedy gave you was a series of different options about how you could go about doing it. And those options really are to address the fact that these are very long. There is a lot of work. Policies can be pages and pages and pages long. That's why he gives you guys options. So it's up to you to decide how you want to do it. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you 3 different options that perhaps could help you consider how you may want to get this done. Number 1 option is to form a committee that includes the entire board. Under your policies, under policy 2.4.4, there is something called a committee of the whole. That means a committee of the whole board. And the reason that I bring up this particular recommendation is because it's your statutory duty and because it's the first item in your policy that you as board members be responsible for the creation. And your policy says formulation and adoption. And I point out formulation because it is the work of the policy to formulate the policy instead of just adopt it. When you have an outside committee that comes in and presents it to you and you vote on it, you as the whole board are not particularly involved in the formulation of the policy. You're only involved in the adoption of the policy, and both the statute and your policies require you to be involved in the formulation. That means the creation of the policy itself. So my first recommendation is that you consider whether or not, according to your policies and under your duties, under the statute and under your own current local policies, you determine whether or not your policy committee that you vote on and create today is a committee of the whole. Now, I realize the importance of what Mr. Kennedy said and realize the involvement of other individuals who may have important and additional comments to make. For example, I realize the importance of your directorship and the incredible leadership and knowledge that they could bring. Simply because you create a committee of the whole does not mean that you automatically exclude any of these individuals and all of their knowledge that they could bring to you. In fact, it would be a detriment to the policy committee if you did not hear from the individuals who are most knowledgeable about how the district operates and whether or not policies that you are formulating and creating would impact your district. That would be part of the duty. Similarly to that, it would be equally important for you to hear from members of the community. So how it's going to impact students, how it's going to impact parents, how it's going to impact the entire community as a whole is also important for you. So as you consider a policy, as you consider the creation of a committee of a whole, please understand that it does not mean that you exclude automatically all those important voices from either the community or from your members of your leadership. The other option would be that you could go back and recreate the committee that was already in process, right? You could go back and formally approve the process that you guys had already talked about, how it was created and all the members that were already there. But you would still need to take some kind of board action to have it created, because as it stands right now, in my opinion, that policy committee has no authority to engage in any of the actions that it has been asked to engage in. So if you want that same committee to be created, then you could go back today and create that committee if you so liked. The other option would be that you would first take some steps to adopt the NMSBA policy service as a whole. And let me take a minute just to explain why I'm even recommending that. The one reason that I'm standing here right now is because your current policies do not provide for any clear mechanism for creating this committee. It took a lot of reading and discernment between the lines for me to stand in front of you today and say, I think you need to take formal action. The NMSBA policy service is down right now, so you probably can't you probably cannot access it, but their formal policy committee already, the NMSBA policy service already has some very specific guidelines for creating what's called an advisory committee. It's similar to what you guys were calling an ad hoc committee, but under the advisory committees, under the NMSBA policy, it describes the actual authority that that committee would have. And what it basically says is the committee itself has no independent authority. It can be created by the board, but has no independent authority to take any action. Everything that is recommended has to be recommended to the board and then adopted by the board as their formal action. This is the second time that I've stood in front of you to address your current policies and concerns about your current policies. You will recall that when I was here in November 29th, one of the things that we were discussing was a resolution that, in my opinion, was to address the fact that the current policies may violate House Bill 212 in terms of the separation of the roles between the board and the superintendent. And as I reviewed your policies again, in preparation for tonight's meeting, I came across a whole other bunch of instances that that in my opinion, make it difficult for this board to follow through with their duties as well as follow the law at the same time. NMSBA policies are not perfect. They're not in any way specific to Los Lunas. They're not in any way taking into consideration your community. I acknowledge that. But what they do have that is a benefit to Los Lunas is that they have an attorney who reviews them on a regular basis, who ensures that their policies are consistent with law. And that is one thing that I can definitely stand here today and say that what you want as a board is to make sure that your policies are consistent with law. The process that you are contemplating undergoing in terms of taking it section by section would require months, if not years. I know you heard from Mr. Kennedy on 1029, and I know that because I listened to the video. He specifically said it could take you guys a year to get through these policies. And that is a long time, in my opinion, for you guys to proceed without policies that follow the law. And while the NMSBA policies, again, are not perfect, there are issues and they're not specific to Los Lunas, I do believe that overall they are more consistent with the law than what you currently have. So my third option for discussion, but not an option for action tonight because it's not noticed appropriately in your agenda and your notice, but your discussion today would be whether or not you would even consider adopting the policies as a whole. Madam President, that's what I have to say tonight. And members of the board, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think we might have some questions. I think I just want to state just for myself, I know upon my reading it, and although you came to a conclusion, I don't think any of that was clear.
Right.
And I know that the difference between may and shall, I know the difference between, you need to do this and it's a requirement versus an option. And I think that when we were talking back in October and November, most of those discussions were based off of what was brought to us by Mr. Kennedy on ways that we may want to proceed as a board, that we would want to consider adopting some of these policies. And I think we liked me personally, I liked the idea of a committee because of the work that it was going to entail. But of course, I also understood that all that work was still going to require it coming back to us, those same presentations needing to, well, maybe not all of the presentation, but majority of those presentations having to be brought back to us, because at the end of the day, we're the ones that make that decision. So I think, first of all, thank you for the clarity, because I don't think it was that clear told to us the first time. But aside from that, I like that we have some options. So board, I'll turn it back over to you if you guys have questions for the attorney, or if you want to just have a discussion.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So you mentioned that the idea of adopting the entire recommended policy from the policy service might be an option, but you also said that it's the responsibility of the local board to formulate and adopt.
Right.
And in that case, we wouldn't be formulating.
That is
We
true.
would be adopting sort of blank check without really looking thoroughly. I mean, we could go back through and look through them systematically. but
Correct.
We wouldn't be formulating.
Correct.
So I'm not sure that that would be something I'd be comfortable with doing.
Mr. Vickers, I completely understand your comment. And my recommendation was such because what you currently have formulated poses so many difficulties in so many different ways that that it's very difficult in some instances to actually come up with a legal recommendation. I will say that Mr. Kennedy's recommendation was probably based on his impression that the OMA would be followed. But as it relates back to formulating policies for here, an adoption of the NMSBA policy as a whole is really, in my recommendation, sort of like a stopgap measure. You would still have to go back, create some kind of committee, take some kind of additional action to ensure that the policies as they exist in the NMSBA service are going to work for Los Lunas. Every single district across the state of New Mexico has to do that. In fact, your current policies and the NMSBA policies and the statute themselves require you as a board to review your policies every single year. So yes, Mr. Vickers, adopting the NMSBA policy as a whole is not formulating. It is a stopgap measure to address the concerns with your current policies, and then allow you then the opportunity to have a framework that is more specific, to create a committee that could then review those policies, or you can do any alternative or combination of the things that I have spoken about today. You could do both. You could create a committee right now that is going to address the NMSBA policy service. And the reason I say that is there's no reason why you couldn't stop. If you as the board decided to adopt the NMSBA policy service, there's no time frame. There's no, statute of limitations or anything that keeps you from immediately beginning to do the work that you were already going to do, which is to review the NMSBA policy service section by section. So you could do both. You could do any alternatives or of any of the things that I have spoken about today.
Thank you.
Listen, anybody?
Yes, so what you're saying is like with the three, that just puts us pretty much within statute of the laws or the things that are out there that we're not right now.
Correct.
And by maybe adding one, which creates all of us board members to be on that committee, we'd be able to get that statute to cover us. So then at that point, we can just review as we go with no, like I said, time frame.
That is correct. Member Bennett, yes, that is correct. Again, going back to what I said, it is your duty under the law to adopt policies. That is your primary duty as a board. Adopting the policies from the NMSBA service is part of that, but that doesn't end your duty. As Mr. Vickers has pointed out, you still have a duty to go back, review, and formulate something that is specific and necessary for your community.
Yes.
So regardless of what path we choose, we have to review each and every one of these policies because we adopted the service. We haven't adopted policies yet, but we've adopted the service. So we're going to have to tailor this. These are probably statutorily more accurate than what we have.
Correct.
And I agree with you after reading them. They're not one size fits all. They're definitely not what I anticipate the Los Lunas School Board Policy Manual to be when it's completed, but it's also a very, very, very good start. A lot of the policies, and I don't know if we took it from statute. I know that originally this policy manual came from another state. But statutorily, some of our policies that were written that we currently have are almost word for word with some of the policies that are in this book.
Sure.
We're not that different. It needs to be tailored. But if we're going to review these policies anyways, and I have said this, I don't want to get caught in the future by something that is out of date or illegal in our policies that we currently use, because we haven't been proactive in getting something that's maybe not guaranteed, but they are telling us that these are the most statutorily accurate policies we could have. So that is something that is in the back of my mind. I also, listening to the comments, believe that the policy adoption, creation, and following belongs to the people that are sitting up here on the top. We're the ones that are responsible for it. Nobody else is going to take the heat for it. We are.
That is correct.
So we are responsible for ensuring that our policies are what we need to do to govern this district. And I agree with you 100%. We have subject matter experts that will help us out tremendously, given that. But the bottom line is, this belongs to us. I know that you gave us a few options for the committees, and I like the option of having the board be the committee and be responsible for this for one reason. Numerous reasons, but this is one of the main ones. Currently, what we were trying to do was have policy meetings and then bring them to the board for a reading. We may do a first reading, a second reading, a third reading. I don't anticipate us ever talking about a policy manual for more than 15 minutes. If we're going to review sections as a board and we're having one board meeting a month, the board should be responsible enough to review those sections and have 3 weeks to do that. So we're not trying to comprehend and adopt and understand policies through a series of 2 or 3 15-minute sections at a board meeting. I don't think that's probably the way to do it. I would rather have the 3 weeks to study it. So when we came in here, if there weren't a lot of questions and we could make minor modifications to these, we don't have to do 3 readings. We could waive the 3 readings and start adopting these policy manuals at a faster rate. But if we're going to do it at 15-minute intervals during board meetings, I don't see that it's going to be fast. I really don't. So that's my 2 cents. Or the other option is to continue with the ones that we have that are out of date until we finish.
Member Smith, if I may respond, I just would remind the board that the illegality or the inconsistency of the meetings is what first brought me in front of you on November 29th. And that hasn't changed. That resolution that you voted for is still there. And I could come up with any number of additional resolutions. But again, they're all stopgap measures until you have reviewed all your policies. The other thing that I want to point out too is, although you can't see it right now because the NMSBA portal has been hacked, and it's not a good day for this to happen when I'm trying to get you guys to look at the NMSBA portal and consider adopting their policies. But at the bottom of each of their policies, they have citations to either the statute or the implementing regulations. So just to back up a second, right? The statute is the supreme law. And then the regulation is something that is adopted either by the public education department or the finance department to implement whatever is in the statute, but to give more detail about it. The legislature doesn't have time to go back and fill in all of the details. They give you a very general idea of what they want you to do. And then the authority gets delegated to the specific departments to give you some additional information. That's how the regulations come about. And so there's a whole section of regulations that have been put out by the public education department. In this case, there may be some under the finance department that applies to public school financing as well. And so in the NMSBA policy service, you will have for every single regulation, there's some citation to either the statute, sometimes to the New Mexico Constitution, and occasionally even to a federal statute if it applies to something related to, for example, special education, which is governed by federal law, which is even more supreme to your state statute. So that is not something that you currently have in your policy service, which makes it in your current policy, which makes it hard for anyone to take a look at and then go back and look at the statute to see if it's in compliance, or go back and take a look at the regulations. It really takes someone who is really well versed in school law to be able to look at it and say, oh, I think this is in 6.69.6. Personnel matters, right? Unless you've spent a lifetime doing that, which most of your constituents have not, they would have no way to know. And so as you're communicating with your public, with your constituents, with the people whose lives are most impacted by these regulations, it would be good for them to know where these policies come from. I don't know where your policies came from. I simply am bringing this to your attention because I have no way of tracing them back to any specific statute or law other than based on my experience.
If I could just jump in there real quick, I think that one thing that we also haven't said that needs to be said is we have a new superintendent that has to follow those policies daily. So even as a board, if we only visit them once every whatever until we get them all formulated and approved, we have staff that's requiring to follow those policies. So I think another important thing to consider is that if our policies are that outdated and don't really reflect, number one, the law or the Constitution, then how can we expect the superintendent and cabinet and staff to do their job based off of those policies? So I think that that's really an important element that we also have to consider when we're deciding this. Now, I know when we heard from Mr. Kennedy, he made that real clear. This is not an easy job. This is going to be a big job. And it's our job. It's our job.
It is.
And at the end of the day, if we're selecting that the committee be the board, then at the end of the day, it was going to have to be our job anyway.
That's right.
So you know, committing the time to make that happen right now was important. Being a member of the New Mexico School Board Association policies that we've been evidently a member of for a little while, it was to prepare schools for this. We're not the only ones in this situation. So I think it's a guiding tool where we would have Mr. Kennedy available, just like he would have been available for whatever committee meeting we had, that he would be present to guide us in the policy adaptation of what we need for Los Angeles schools. So I think all of that would still happen and will all be available to us. It would just be a requirement that that it come to us as board, if as one of the options that's being discussed today.
Right. And again, just to reiterate, simply because you create a committee of the whole, which is a committee of the entire board, does not mean that you do not get to hear from the public or from your other leadership. It still allows you to engage all of those other voices. I will say one last thing based on what Member Smith said. Member Smith talked about 3 readings. I am not 100% sure that the NMSBA policy service requires 3 readings. So, and I was going to check it, but you know, their portal is down right now, so I can't get in there. But I will follow up with each of you to let you know if you adopt the NMSBA policy as a whole, it may be that you don't need the 3 readings. It would be a different, you would have to adopt the NMSBA policy service, you would have to follow your current policies because they're currently controlling. Once you adopted that policy, you would follow that policy for any additional changes that you would want to make that would localize those policies to fit Los Lunas.
Correct. So if we follow our current policies, then we do have to have 3 readings.
Correct.
Well,
Unless it's an emergency and you
we
wait.
don't have to have 3 readings, but
Correct.
our policy says that.
Correct.
And there's a way for us to override that if we needed to.
You can,
Yes, go ahead.
under your current policy.
Madam Chair, Claire, I just want to make sure I understood what you said. We cannot take action to adopt the NM. the
SBA policy
policy as a whole at this meeting because it's not
in the agenda.
noticed that way.
Correct.
So, so that would have to be on the next meeting. Whatever that is.
It would have to be noticed on your agenda. The way the agenda is written today is for discussion of the committee.
Right.
That's what is to be discussed today and how that committee is going to get its work done. And the reason we're talking about these options is because it could affect whether or not you create a committee or not.
Well-
Yes, sir.
You know, the resolution that we passed that was a little controversial, allowing the superintendent some leeway in
Correct.
acting, you have just highlighted exactly why the superintendent needed that, because it is confusing and conflicting,
Correct.
and we need to fix it.
And I would remind you, Member Vickers, that I was only looking at one policy at the time that I brought the resolution forward.
Right, okay.
Correct, but we're also asking someone to look and interpret a policy that may or may not be statutorily active.
Correct.
So
Also true.
I meant. Yeah, the resolution didn't say, hey, if they're legitimate, then you can interpret them. It said, do it all.
Fair enough. Any more questions for me?
Mr. Hidod, I'm sorry, I want to identify you. Is there any questions you have for our council?
No, I'm okay.
Thank you, sir.
Madam
right.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm prepared to make a motion to make the board a policy committee of the whole. And then that we need to get on the next agenda, the action to adopt the
SBA.
NMSA policy manual.
So is that a motion? Is that your motion?
Yes,
So Mr. Vickers has made a motion that number one, we vote on making the board the actual the board as a whole, the policy committee. Do you want to, is that the right way to say it? Is that what you have in mind?
well, I don't know, we could, that we make the policy committee a committee of the board as a whole.
So I got a motion by Mr. Vickers.
Second.
I got a second by Mr. Smith.
I don't know if we can add any detail to that, but I think we probably need to have some regular meetings outside of regular board meetings to deal with this, because it is such an immense task as far as then going through these
So,
policies, like,
so before we talk about what those meetings would look like, I have a suggestion, but before we go there, is it possible for us to have more discussion on the motion and the second first? Okay, so not hearing any discussion, I've got a motion.
President,
Go-
President, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Vickers, can you clarify exactly what you mean by the board being the committee? I mean, I want to make sure I'm clear on this.
it would be what's called a committee of the whole, which is in our policy 2.4.4. Where we would comprise the committee.
Okay,
That would be the new policy committee. We don't have a legally constituted policy committee, as was pointed out by council at the moment, so.
okay.
Any more questions, Mr. Hidon?
No, that's it.
Okay, so I've got a motion and I got a second. Are we ready for a vote? All right, Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
A very happy yes. I think this is the same conversation we had in October trying to make the board, the policy committee. I vote yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
Mr. Vickers,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
I vote yes, and I would like to find a way to include the community as much as possible, perhaps maybe sharing this, and we'll look into how we want to do this. I agree that the vote has to take place. We have to have a committee before we'll know how the committee acts, but some way to include the committee, maybe if it's a link that we're sharing what policies we're working on and give them the opportunity to speak to board members. So that being said, I vote yes.
and I also vote yes. So motion passes that the Board of Education is also the committee for policy to move forward from this point on. The comment I might have is that you were meeting once I don't know if it's gonna be once a month or twice a month prior to what we now know we need to establish. I asked gentlemen and I put out there, is it possible that we have another meeting added to our schedule on a Tuesday, and I don't care if it's at night or early afternoon or whatever everybody's work schedule would allow. So we'd go back to 2 meetings a month, with the first meeting being policy. It could be a work session where we have those discussions. We definitely get public input. We definitely get cabinet input. We know what the policy that we're addressing or the bulk of those policies are. And we make ourselves available to start that process immediately. I mean, as soon as April, if the board's available. I think that gives us that time that we need to work on it and still meet our second meeting of the month to talk the budgetary issues, and if it has to go to a vote or whatever. So those are just a comment and a suggestion I had. And I believe Dr. Elder also had some comments on how to get this information out to the public.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, I was thinking that we want to make sure that we have opportunity for input. And what we found during COVID with families is that digital is a great way to engage our families. They really do participate. And so I thought maybe we could put the section of policy that we're working on at that particular time period before it goes to the board up on the website, have a response sheet that anybody could reply to with their comments. And then that way the board would get comments from a broader spectrum of the community, not just the people who can show up to a particular committee meeting at a particular time and place.
And of course, still posting that notice so public is invited to the meeting and can also be present and give a public comment section where they can come up and address the board on any policy we're addressing.
Right, doing both.
Right, because we're open meeting and that would be a requirement. Gentlemen, any comments on any of that? Or, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Madam President, members of the board, since you have just created a committee of the whole, I would just remind the board that any meeting that you have as your policy committee is entirely subject to the Open Meetings Act. So you have to put out a notice in the same way. You have to make sure that you have a quorum in the same way. You have to create an agenda in the same way as before. So just a reminder to you. So yes, you're subject to the Open Meetings Act every time you meet.
And just to clarify, it can be a work session or it can be a regular meeting,
Right.
whichever we prefer.
You can call it a party if you want to. It doesn't matter what you call it. When all board members are there and a quorum is present, whatever you call it is still a board meeting subject to the Open Meetings Act.
And does that restrict us on voting on those policies? Can we vote if we're in a work session versus a regular meeting?
You have no restriction as long as your agenda is specific enough, right? Another section of the Open Meetings Act says that you have to notify the public of what you will be doing in that meeting.
session.
And that's why I specifically asked it tonight. You had both a discussion and an action item. If you don't designate that you're going to have an action item at that work session, then you cannot vote at a work session. If you wanted to be able to vote, you would have to make sure your agenda says that it's both a discussion and action.
Thank you. So I leave that out there. I don't know if you guys want to give any input on that, or if you just want to think about it and we've got an agenda request already for April by Mr. Vickers that we add on that agenda, a possible adoption of the New Mexico School Board Association policy for a vote in April. So if that is a possibility, then I would, of course, just ask the board to put some dates available, because we're gonna have to meet more than one time a month.
Clarification on one thing that I didn't realize before, a work session and a board meeting. You can have action items either way, as long as they're properly noticed.
But the Open Meetings Act itself does not distinguish between what you call a work session and what you call a meeting. What it looks at is whether or not you have a quorum. Now, the practice in public schools is to have a work session where there's a lot of discussion that takes place, a lot of reviewing that takes place, and no action that takes place. It's just you're going through and reviewing and, like, for example, the budget. You're not going to approve the budget. It's a lot of work to review all of those things, ask all the questions, give feedback, right? So you don't necessarily have to have a action item at a work session either. You could save your action item for your follow-up meeting if that has, if that is what your community is used to, and you want to make sure that your community is aware of what is occurring. You don't have to have an action item for your work session. But again, under the Open Meetings Act, the key distinction is whether or not you have a quorum present and it's noticed appropriately.
Ms. Garcia.
Yes, sir.
So a couple of comments, suggestions, actually. If we're going to do it 2 times a month, I would prefer that they were both board meetings and one entitled policy. And that's all we're doing during that meeting. So we don't have to drag everybody here 2 times a month. And work session, I guess, historically seems sort of informal. And I think our policy adoption should be a formal thing. And I would like to see it as a board meeting stuff. Specific agenda item for that second meeting, strictly policy. And if we need a subject matter expert here, we can have that. And if we don't, then we don't have to have everybody, you know what I'm saying, unless there's comments that are going to be made, and that's it. That's just a suggestion. So we can just take action as soon as it's available.
So, Mr. Vickers, I am correct in saying that's the item you want put on the agenda in April.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Any other discussion on committee? All right, then let's move on to item number 8, which is approval of the state bilingual multicultural education program funding application. Now, this item came up during the spring break. It had a deadline of March 31st, which is this week. So we added this to the agenda for today because this application requires board approval. I will turn this over to Dr. Elder if there's going to be any information about what this is, or if the board just chooses to take action today. I need a motion for that. So does any board member want more information on what that?
I think Madam President, I think we've heard enough. I think I would like the motion. We just vote on the approval of the state bilingual multicultural education program funding application.
All right, so I have a motion by I got a motion by Mr. Vickers and I got a second by Mr. Hidon. Any discussion on the approval of the state bilingual multicultural education program funding application?
You have a motion by Mr.
I got a motion by Mr. Bennett and a second by Mr. Hidon. Did I say that backwards?
You said me.
Sorry. Okay, so I got the motion by Bennett, second by Hidon. Not hearing any other discussion, I'm going to call for the vote. Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
And I too vote yes. That item is now approved and we can sign that for you tonight, Sandy. Thank you. Next brings us to the announcement of meetings as allowed by the Open Meetings Act and the District Open Meetings Resolution. And on occasion, a quorum of the board members attend the same function, including those held at school sites at the district level, as well as sports functions and conferences, trainings that are going to be included in the upcoming National School Board Association Conference and the New Mexico School Board Association Region 4 Board Trainings. Board members will refrain from discussing and or acting as Las Lunas School Board of Education issues in those settings. In addition, only official meetings are published, and if other meetings are scheduled, they will be announced in accordance with the Opens Meeting Act. With that having been said, I would like to announce the following meetings. On March 31st to April the 3rd, the National School Board Association Annual Conference will be held in Orange County, Orlando, Florida. A quorum will be in attendance. On April 11th, the Finance Committee will meet here in Central Boardroom at 3:00 p.m. On April 12th, the New Mexico School Board Association Region 4 will have their spring meeting. It will be held here at Las Lunas High School. A quorum will be in attendance. On April 18th will be our next regular board meeting here in the Central Boardroom, and that'll be at 6:00 p.m. That leads us to the adjournment of the meeting. I think do we all need to sign that bilingual application today? So I think we all need to stay.
May I interrupt for just a
Yes.
second? Madam President, members of the board, could you also add the ones that we just talked about for finance committee or the budget stuff? Starting with April 18th or actually April 11th.
So just for announcement of meetings, it looks like we also have, and I'm looking at this one. Is this the one you want me to read from?
Presentations, please. For
Okay.
April 11th.
So there'll also be a possible quorum in attendance at the spring budget workshop, April 11th through the 13th. Principal department and input sessions, March 7th through the 8th. The board overview is March 28th, which was today. The NEA session is March 29th at 3:30 p.m. in Central Boardroom. The parent advisory and public hearing is April 17th, 6:00 p.m. here in the Central Boardroom. The final board work session will be on April 18th at 4:30 p.m. here in the Central Boardroom. The board approval of the budget is going to be on May 9th, 6:00 p.m. here in the Central Boardroom. And I believe those are the only meetings that a quorum would be in attendance.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. I need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I got a motion by Mr. Smith, a second by Mr. Bennett. Any discussion on adjournment? Mr. Hidon,
Yeah, I vote yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
Mr. Vickers,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Meeting is adjourned, 7:30.
Ms. Garcia, before I finish up, would you ask Mr. Hidon to step by our office?
So, Mr. Hidon, before we hang up, there might be some documents for you to sign whenever you have time. Come into the office, okay? He hung up.
Help me.
I'll
Okay.
figure out if I have to say something.